They didn't like the real models, and so they invented their own model inside the Trump White House about a month ago. And that model, from a White House economist with no background whatsoever in health, let alone infectious disease, told them that this thing was soon to be done. It was going to be over. What they called this an econometric model created by Kevin Hassett, this economist with no background in infectious diseases. That was the Washington Post on May 2nd. 2 days later, White House officials gave this model a name. Quote, White House officials have been relying on models, including a, quote, cubic model prepared by Trump advisor and economist Kevin Hassett and the Council of Economic Advisors. What is this cubic model that's telling them we should get the whole country open right away because this thing is going away magically on its own and soon? It'll be in our rear view. It'll be in our rear view mirror by the time we get to Memorial Day. What is this cubic model? Nobody really knows, but the Washington Post did get multiple White House sources to tell them what that model said. Quote, the model shows deaths dropping precipitously in May and essentially going to zero by May 15th. 0 deaths by May 15th. May 15th was this past Friday, 3 days ago. American deaths from coronavirus did not go to zero by May 15th. Now, why are they calling this a cubic model? Why did the White House decide this was the model they were going to follow? That seems obvious. What is a cubic model? Where did they get this? Nobody really knows. A cubic function is a mathematical concept that has nothing to do with how viruses work or contagion works. It is a sort of a math way to put a meaningless line over a bunch of numbers on a graph that makes the numbers look like they'll drop to zero or less than zero right after they peak. You can do that. You can draw a line like that on any amount of data on an Excel spreadsheet without having any understanding of infectious diseases or contagion whatsoever. And I'm sure it's very comforting if you decide to believe that line is a real thing. But that line isn't a real thing. It's just a thing you can put on a graph. Kevin Hassett and the Council of Economic Advisors eventually tweeted out this Sharpie. Look at this. This isn't somebody else drawing on it. This is actually what they tweeted out, this Sharpie-looking thing to defend how rigorous their model was. But this is their model created by an economist that the White House used to base decisions on reopening around the country. But it is literally just a thing they made up about what they hoped might happen with the epidemic that has nothing to do with real epidemiology. It said their deaths would be zero by May 15th, and so they cranked to get the whole country open to take advantage of the fact that deaths would be zero. Jason Furman was chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama. He said in response to this from the Trump White House, quote, this might be the lowest point in the 74-year history of the Council of Economic Advisors. The stakes on the epidemiological questions are so high that this utterly superficial and misleading modeling has no place whatsoever in any discussion of the government's response. He continued, quote, faux expertise is even worse than ignorance. To the degree that this crowded out input from genuine experts and confused other participants into thinking that the Council of Economic Advisors or other economists had any sort of real or valid model of the epidemic, it is really and truly terrible. But here we are, in the world created to some degree by policies pushed by a White House that decided to believe this model that they invented out of whole cloth. Here we are 3 days after the White House's imaginary model made by their economist friend said that U.S. deaths would be at zero. And of course, U.S. deaths are not at zero. We have the biggest coronavirus epidemic in the world. U.S. deaths continue their inexorable climb up over 90,000 at this point. The only question right now, in terms of the milestones here, is whether we're going to hit 100,000 dead Americans by the beginning of next month, or are we going to hit it sooner?